At the time appointed, he shall return and come into the south. That's his second invasion of Egypt in 168. But this time it shall not be as it was before. For ships of the Kittim shall come against him and cause him to lose heart and withdraw. Now we have an account of that in the Roman historians. And the way the story goes, a Roman legate named Papilius Lenas met him on the beach outside Alexandria at a place called Eleusis, and demanded that he withdraw from Egypt, and drew a circle around him in the sand and said he wanted his answer before he stepped out of that circle. Now, Antiochus, even though Antiochus was sometimes referred to as the madman, he had called himself Epiphanes, which means God made manifest. And some people called him Epimanes, the madman. But he was no fool. And when the Romans told him that he needed to reply before he stepped out of that circle, he replied, and he withdrew from Egypt. He wasn't about, to get into a war with Rome. His father had done that, and it had been a disaster. They were still paying off the debts. Now, it is after that, it says, he shall lose heart and withdraw. So he withdrew from Egypt. He shall be enraged and take action against the Holy Covenant. It is on his way back from Egypt that he sacks Jerusalem. Now, why did he do that? Well, we have an account of that in 2nd Maccabees, and the one in 2nd Maccabees has much more detail than the account in 1st Maccabees. So, what had happened? When he was in Egypt, a rumor spread in Jerusalem that he had been killed. Now, there had been a dispute going on as to who should be high priest. And there was a man named Jason who had gone to the king and promised him more money if he would make him high priest. And the king said, "Great idea, you're high priest." And so he got rid of the legitimate high priest. And then a little bit later, a man named Menelaus was taking the tribute to the king, and he said, if you made me high priest, I'd give you more. And so the king said, even better idea. And so Menelaus became high priest. And now Jason tried to get the high priesthood back. So Jason attacked Menelaus, and in effect, a civil war broke out in Jerusalem. When the king heard this, he took it that all Judea was in revolt. And he had just been humiliated in Egypt. And so on the way back, it says, he shall be enraged and take action against the Holy Covenant. Forces by him shall occupy and profane the temple and the fortress. The fortress is, it's really, the temple itself was fortified.
Mm-hmm.
If you've been to Jerusalem and seen the Temple Mount, you know the kind of thing we're talking about.
Right.
Now, what was he actually trying to do? And there's been endless debate about this, and you will not get it clearly stated, you see, in the sources. I mean, from Daniel's point of view, this was a completely irrational action by the king. Nowadays, they would accuse him of anti-Semitism. If the assumption is it's an ideological hostility to the Jewish people, or the people of Judea. But now what he probably was doing, the best account I've ever found of it, is that when a king conquered an area, it was the custom to permit the people to live according to their ancestral laws. But this was given as a privilege by the king. And what Antiochus Epiphanes was probably doing was withdrawing that privilege. That means you cannot live according to your ancestral laws. If you live according to your ancestral laws, you're a distinct people. And what he wanted to do was say, no more Judah. He wasn't trying to suppress the Jewish religion. He wasn't trying to interfere with Jewish communities outside of Judea. But he was trying to destroy what was distinctive about Judea and make them like everybody else in his empire. So that's what he was doing. If you allow for the fact that Daniel, sees this as completely irrational, it's a well-informed account. He goes on, forces by him shall occupy and profane the temple and the fortress. They shall abolish the regular burnt offering and set up the abomination that makes desolate. Now, these are the things that kind of run through the book of Daniel, and you get them in 1st Maccabees too. So, first of all, the normal cult is a sacrifice in the morning and a sacrifice in the evening, and he abolishes that. From the viewpoint of a real believer in Judaism, this was disastrous.
Right.
This is how you stave off the anger of God, by giving him his breakfast and his supper. So this would have been disastrous. And on top of that, he erects what's called the abomination that makes desolate. Now, it's again not all that clear just what that is. Prevailing explanation of it is that it was in pagan temples, in Syrian temples, they had typically horned altars. And apparently he put one of these horned altars on top of the great altar of sacrifice in the Jerusalem temple. And this was said to make desolate. And that in Hebrew it's shikutz meshomem. Shikutz is an abomination.
Right.
It's the same word that gives you shiksa. So, it's bad. Meshomem, I think, and this was proposed more than 100 years ago, was a pun on Baal Shamem, Baal of the heavens, who would have been the main god worshipped in Syria.
So technically this, and just help me connect the dots here, because I'm thinking of the golden calf, I'm thinking of Josiah's reforms, I'm thinking of all of these kind of images from horned bull type figures, El, Baal, these other figures like you're describing. So this is potentially the answer. I've heard people try to say he was putting Zeus in there or something like that.
You see, Baal Shamem would have been identified with Zeus Olympios. This was one of the things that the Greeks did when they went to a place, was they tried to figure if they met a deity that they didn't know before. They asked, now, could this be somebody we know by a different name? And so they established a set of coincidences. Actually, the popular one for the god of Israel was Dionysus, and that's because of all the wine that was used in the worship. But I think this is what he's describing.
One note on desolation, just going to the Gospels for 1 second, and I know that's not your specific focus. You're a Hebrew Bible scholar, but you have written and published, and you know extensively about late Second Temple Judaism. And this is late Second Temple Judaism that we find in this literature. I've had some make interesting observations. I don't know how convinced you are, but the abomination of desolation, or that makes desolate in the Jerusalem temple, which I think is hinting, in my opinion, I think Mark, Matthew, and Luke are aware of the destruction that took place of the temple. But some say this might have been a sign of Caligula going in and setting up an image, or attempting to, like they're getting signs, and some even think Paul is hinting at this with the man of sin who's trying to set himself up for worship. Could be Caligula, could be Nero, one of these emperors. Are you persuaded by any particular interpretation on those points?
Not by any particular one, but I think it is obviously some pagan siglum. Now, it could be even Roman banners. It could be a statue of the emperor. It could be a statue of a pagan god. I think what it means in the New Testament is probably different from what it meant in Daniel's original context.
Right.
But it is some symbol of pagan religion or pagan power that they figured didn't belong in the temple.
You would never interpret that as these are rebels or zealots or Jews in any way.
No. I mean, it's coming from the imperial side. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I think, in the case of Daniel, it is something that is associated with Baal Shamem. Now, it's not inconceivable that it was a statue. The explanation that's most commonly accepted is that it was a pagan altar that was installed. Now, this is in line with what you read in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And so the assumption is Daniel is doing fine here. He will seduce with intrigue those who violate the covenant. So some people say, yes, your majesty, this is what you want, this is what we will do. But the people who are loyal to their God shall stand firm and take action. What action will they take? Some people would say that must be the Maccabees. I don't actually think so.
Really?
Because it says the wise among the people. Now, these may not be the only people who take action, but they're the people that the book of Daniel relates to and regards as the heroes. The wise among the people shall give understanding to many. So what do they do? What's the action that they take? They will explain to people what's really going on.
So no violence necessarily.
No violence. We'll get to that.
Okay.
Why not? But they will explain. Now, what is this understanding that they will give them?
Right.
Now, if you've ever read anything by Richard Horsley,
yes,
Richard would say, these were scribes explaining the Torah. The Torah doesn't come up at all in this. The only understanding that comes up in this is what you've been getting in the visions of Daniel. And what you had in chapter 10 is that the real battle is being fought upstairs. You think that this is a battle between Antiochus Epiphanes and the Maccabees. But actually, it's a battle between the Prince of Greece, an angel, and Michael, the Prince of Israel. And that's the struggle that's going to determine what happens on earth.